Number one, go for it.
Yeah. So my name is Julian. I'm with the Albuquerque DSA. So I'm a little outside your district.
A little bit. That's
A bill that was that's being proposed by Representative Gail Chasey is the Felon Reenfranchisement Act. I think that's House Bill 57. Have you had a chance to develop an opinion on that one?
So what I understand about it is, so felon reenfranchisement is typically passive crimes where, typically drug-related crimes, folks go to prison and they're felons. If you have even the tiniest, whatever illicit drug in your possession, which is devastating because you can't get a job after that. You can't get access to basic needs in a lot of circumstances, and we're creating felons out of people who are simply drug addicted in many cases. So absolutely support. I talked to a bunch of different judges and actually approached Judge Jason Lydiard, who is very much focused on a lot of that criminal justice reform even in his courtroom, and that's essentially making sure that we can defelonize essentially drug addiction is what we're hoping to try to work toward, because they just need help. I mean, they need assistance in recovery, and we don't have enough of those resources currently, so how do we at least transition that to be fair? So absolutely in support of that.
Well, the reenfranchising bill is to give people back their voting rights.
Oh,
It's more on that side of it.
both and, yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
both and, absolutely.
Okay. Awesome.
Okay, number two.
Okay. I'll be fast. I'm concerned with the air quality, declining air quality in Santa Fe, and the area, and I wanted to know what you were planning to do with that in terms of forest thinning and transportation.
So on the air quality piece, there is actually quite a bit of additional federal funding. I don't know how much the state is yet looking at forest thinning, but I'm happy to look into that and follow that up. When it comes to transportation, there is an electric vehicle bill that will be coming up incentivizing for electric vehicle purchases. And I know as a state, any sort of new statewide purchase for new vehicles, they're looking at electric first, and how to basically see how either hybrid or electric can be the focus. Public transportation is a tough one because a lot of times it's very localized. It's not typically necessarily at the state level. I know that the state is going to help fund the regional transit district buses. That creates access, in our district definitely, where folks don't have any access to public transportation. So happy to support that. As far as additional, specifics, could be something like that. But I know that the state we're looking at focusing on how we can incentivize electric vehicle purchase as we're transitioning into clean energy, with Four Corners and other areas, and seeing our, local investments going to solar. And there's a community solar bill and other things. So how can we, if we can access that, make sure that, we start weaning off of oil and gas in our vehicles as well. So.
Number three.
Oh, sorry, I didn't remember the number. Yes, I have a question regarding economic development, which I didn't know that you have an extensive background. So the Cleveland model has been emulated by other cities around the nation and now even internationally. And one of the elements is workers' cooperatives and other kinds of worker participation incentives. Do you have any ideas regarding that? My concern comes from efforts in the past which have been mostly directed at attracting businesses from somewhere, national chains, and then they come and then they go whenever they want, and then it doesn't stay. So that's been, I think, the advantage of those models, and of course us being for socialism and worker participation as much as possible. We are really concerned about what are your thoughts regarding that.
So a couple of things. There's going to be a lot of additional investment in homegrown New Mexico businesses that should be scaling at this point that aren't. So that's one way of doing it. A lot of the focus that we are seeing, because our education system has been so crushed in the past 8 years, is really focusing on job training and development and how that sort of stems out from the ability to, if you, in particular, for a lot of the trades jobs that have been traditionally, well, not traditionally, but have recently been sort of left off the map of, some of the greatest needs that we have in New Mexico. So plumbers, pipe fitters, electricians, mechanics, all of those things. There's going to be a lot of folks focused on getting those job training programs up and running. And now that we have a workforce development secretary, that switch is going to be quickly turned on to look at investments in getting those job training centers available across the state, in particular in rural areas where we've seen so much of their economies being devastated. I think another way of doing that is I know it's kind of been batted around a few times in the legislature, is a B Corp bill, so benefit corporation bill, that we actually can't businesses today in New Mexico cannot form as a benefit corporation. So you will see, employee-owned companies and things like that, but they want the designation, so they go get it from like somewhere else outside of the state. But you can't be recognized in the state. So I think moving in that direction of what does good business look like, where you can do well and do good, right, financially, is doing both and I think if we can take those steps to really recognize that, we'll start seeing more cooperative models come through, and that recognition helps that, sort of market base. And so we'll see, how we can continue to invest in economic development in that way. There's also, looking at how we can create high-risk capital for folks to be able to access in our state. How the state does that, I don't know exactly, but there's, some, at least, certain firms that are trying to target small business development and looking at the micro level. If Santa Fe doesn't have great coffee shops and restaurants and other things, like, nobody wants to live here either. So we actually need more businesses that support businesses, is one of the bigger needs in some of our like microeconomies, even in Santa Fe and in Albuquerque, some of our other cities, that is how to be able to grow that. If we keep seeing even small businesses go out of business, it's not good for bigger business either. And so, how we can continue to grow that out and support it. I think, local, the city, the county, and others are going to be, banding together about how to be able to continue to promote that kind of business building. But at the state level, we're just looking at a lot more job training focus and how to be able to spread it out so that, businesses can access the right sort of, capital that they need to be able to be well served here and serve a workforce well.
We move on to number 4.
Yeah, so I'm really fascinated politically with the corrupting influence of money in politics. And I think you're a supporter of our Wolfpack's free and fair election resolution. But I guess so broadly, how on a state level do you address that corruption? And also kind of maybe as a follow-up, would you ever pledge to not take any fossil fuel donations or prison money? And then kind of how do you deal with the perception? I feel like there's some perception in your district that you're kind of like this big money person, dark money or something. Like how do you address corruption and perception? And would you ever consider pledging to not take?
I already made that pledge even during the primary that I delivered to Orland last night. In fact, I sent a check back to Devon Energy in October, and so which is so.
Prison money?
I don't know enough about that, but at the same time, I've never been even offered. So I don't think we're on the same page. I wonder why I haven't. No. But yeah, I mean, I would be willing to look into it, absolutely. But as far as what we want to get money out of politics, definitely been to many meetings with New Mexicans, Money Out of Politics, and you're exactly right. How can we help fix this situation? How can we actually move into a way where our democracy is truly a democracy and not a financial exchange? It is devastating as a first-time candidate to basically say that your first line of business is raising money every single day for as long as you possibly can, until you've reached your goal, so that we can then get our message out. And it's extremely tough. And for those that do want to run for office, that is really like what you're told, is like, you've got to raise money in order to be successful. And it's extremely disheartening, because you're like, what about the ideas, and what about the things we're trying to fight for and change? And but that's why those grassroots situations where $5, $20, whatever you can give to help support the candidates that you like, make a huge difference. And at this point, it's what the state can do. And I know that the Secretary of State's office is looking at how to continue to shape our campaign finance situations, so that it is more like what you're talking about, where candidates aren't bought and sold. It's tough in the legislature where we're unpaid, and you often hear about lobbyists, sort of bankrolling, folks and supporting their special interests in different ways. I will not be taking any gifts or meals at all during my time in office. And so that's something that's already really challenging to navigate, because you're asked to come to a dinner or a thing, and you definitely want to be part of the conversation, but you're just like, I'm good. I'll just have water, thank you. It's very strange, interesting dynamic already. So it's just changing that sort of cultural norm, and just saying, like, this is just something that I personally have decided, and how I want to go at it is it's a new approach. But to make it better and easier for legislators would to be able to pay them so that they can eat and afford that. And I know there's likely going to be a bill to do that. They actually passed it back in 2008, or maybe it was one of Suzanne Martinez's first years in office, second or third year, where they were designing essentially a committee to look at what should legislators be paid, how often should we work. 60 days a year is nearly impossible in my mind to get everything done. So how to spread that out, and it's everything's so compressed in a 60-day session, and then the next session is only 30 days. So how can we have potentially an independent body look at some of that as well? And I'm sure that a similar thing could be done with campaign finance reform and money in politics. So as much as we can support that, we want to, and we'll just see how this works now, and whatever I can do to support that path forward, I will. So thanks for the question.
Person number 5.
That's me. Andrea, this is wonderful. I'm so glad I came. As you know, my big issue is climate change. And let's see how to put this in terms of a question. I mean, we have all this money coming in from fossil fuels now, but to have any chance at a future, we have to keep the fossil fuels in the ground. So how are we going to do this? Could you be the one who stands up in the legislature and says, we got to shut it down as soon as we can? I mean, as soon as we can. I mean, tomorrow. So
this is extremely tough, right? Because
Yeah.
literally all of our education system is funded by oil and gas. It is a rock and a hard place for New Mexico, and that is why I'm so committed to tax reform, and figuring out how to stabilize budgets, and in that weaning off of oil and gas, in a reliance upon the state. It's a hard one, because we're working with colleagues in the southeast corridors and northwest corridors, and they're like, this is our bread and butter. These are our working families. These are, so we want to support what we can, but as I've sat down with different groups that have said, you know, oil and gas is New Mexico's lifeline, is saying climate change is real, and we want to work with you to essentially say that the future is clean energy. That is what New Mexico will be investing in itself, and how can we work with you as an industry to essentially move in that direction, because that is the direction New Mexico is going to go, and that's our commitment, and that's been my commitment in running for office and making sure that we have a future and an earth to live on. So it's that sort of how it's either we can be adversarial, where we are going to make critical decisions in the legislature about that clean energy future and about protecting water and about protecting land and the future of humanity, or we can work together where you can be leaders in this regard in how we make that transition. And so that's basically what I've left on the table when I've met with folks that represent oil and gas, is saying, here's my commitment to clean energy and our future, and we want to move in that direction. So can we work with you, or don't get left behind, because we're going to go there. That's the direction the world is headed into, and we should be no different. It's a very, very tough decision, and a tough position that our state has decided upon. But there's hope. I mean, we're seeing the coal plant, getting closed down in the Four Corners area. We're hoping to expedite that process as quickly as possible. There's just, we're going to have to address it, and as a state, and my commitment is going in that clean energy direction.
Person number 6.
I hope we get a paid legislature. It might help you out. We're the only state, I understand, in the whole country that doesn't have a paid legislature. My issue, I think there's a bill on gun safety, and I was just wondering if you could talk on that.
Yeah, actually there's several. There's a universal background checks bill that actually Senator Richard Martinez, we share part of the Chimayo area. He's going to be sponsoring, fully in support of that. There is a domestic violence gun safety bill that essentially allows a judge to ensure that law enforcement goes into any home that where someone has been convicted of domestic violence, and remove any gun from that household by order of the judge. Right now we have that, but there's no enforcement mechanism, and so we want to be able to create that. There's other potential gun, I don't know if it was pre-filed or not, but what they call restraining orders, or temporary restraining orders for those that are seeking a gun, where essentially if someone is in a volatile situation, they can go to a law enforcement person and get an issue from a judge that says this person should not have access to the gun, at least in a temporary state, where maybe it's a behavioral health issue, maybe it's a something else is going on, but allows that sort of restraining order to get into place where they won't be able to access a gun, and it'll be evaluated by a judge. But I think the universal background checks bill is going to be probably, and of course the domestic violence bill. Those two are really the focus of the moms moms demanding action for gun safety, and the New Mexicans Against Gun Violence. They'll be supporting each of those. New Mexico's Against Gun Violence. Yeah, they'll be supporting those initiatives. So something to watch closely. But I will be supporting those very happily. I think I heard from from Every Town for gun safety that I was the first campaign sign in the country that had their endorsement on my actual campaign sign, which I was like, really? The first? That's insane. So yeah, gun safety, very, very important issue to me. Yeah. Thank you.
My I believe that takes us, if I haven't lost count, over to number 7, Greg.
Right, so there's a whole bunch of really good election reform bills coming. I know Damon Eli's brought up a declined estate. I can vote in a primary, an open primary bill. There's a same-day registration bill he wants. There's one out of the Senate that's actually a 3-day early registration. I'm not sure what that's about.
Don't know that.
I know there's like
Three
a
days,
500-page omnibus bill that I haven't been able to read yet.
Yeah, Ivy Soto, all of his bills apparently are like that.
And so I wonder if you know like, the correlation between those, and wanted to hear where you stand on those different issues.
I don't know the correlation between the different ones, but you know, many, as we know, same day, you know, registration for voting is a huge voter empowerment opportunity. Same thing with, and when we see our primaries here in New Mexico, if you're not in one of those categories, you can't vote in the primaries. So open primaries. You know, I don't know the correlation, but we'll be supporting both.
Oh, I know the correlation between the omnibus bill and all these.
Oh,
other
I honestly, I think it's like 400 pages, the omnibus bill, so I have not yet read it.
Okay.
But it's basically something that looks at micro level fixes and I actually think it might have campaign finance in there. It's election day reforms. There's election reforms in there. Funding, access. I think it's, again, you know, 400 pages hashing that out. So, you know, Senator Ivy Soto, if you've followed any of his legislation, it is always very, very substantive. So I haven't read through it fully, but you're going to see, I think, a lot of those little micro changes, and you know, we'll see.
All right, cool.
So we have a few more minutes left, so I want to see if there's any other questions that might still be floating around.
I have a quick one. So we found out from Ocasio-Cortez, and she was the first one to let us know this, that the House orientation is pretty sketchy with a bunch of corporate interests and not really much representation from labor. Is it anything like that in New Mexico, or?
You know, we don't. The orientation that I had was really more like networking and camaraderie building with your new colleagues. It was very closed in that regard. You get to know the staff at the legislature, who is absolutely fantastic. And I didn't know as much as I had. I actually probably discounted a lot of like what is actually going on over there. The Legislative Council Service, and this is something that is open to every one of you. I'm happy to be a conduit for you. Provides research services and for any potential legislation. They have legal provision, you know, services for anything in that regard. They'll do fiscal analysis, educational analysis. I mean, it is so comprehensive in what they support. There's 80 people that help support us as legislators to do all of that work. It is incredible. So a lot of it was really more getting to know how the system works that supports us to do that job for 60 days when in session. And, you know, that and how that all works.
So it wasn't like, hey, this is how it's really done up here.
No, thankfully. But I think going back to that whole idea of everything that is supplement to that process, the food, the drinks, the everyday, a lobbyist purchases those things for, and it's like it's an every single day, whether it's a breakfast burrito or a, you know, salad up in the 4th floor, that is all purchased by a lobbyist who says, like, don't forget we bought you this, you know. So that is something that is fascinating.
That's not counted as a gift.
That is counted. Absolutely, it's counted as a gift.
So you're like refusing burritos from these guys?
Oh yeah. So because that's just it. So I'll be eating a lot of beans and rice for this day. But yeah, I mean that's kind of the sort of interesting sort of process that I'm hoping to avoid, but also navigate through. That just says like, you know, it's just something I'm.
They're not giving like presentations to you.
Well, they can, as if you show up to that lunch, they can offer you, you know, information. How are you thinking about this bill? You're coming to them, and that's a conduit for sure. And they have that. I mean, every single night, I've been getting invitations for. This is so odd, by the way. I've gotten more Christmas cards this year than I've ever had. But which is very nice, but also very strange for never, being on anyone's radar for that matter beforehand. Yeah, I mean, dinners from, corporate interests come and have, drinks on us or reception or dinners and things like that. So there are certain things that you want to have a conversation with. I do want to talk to Comcast about why our service is so bad. And, I do want to talk to, but so on and so forth. So you do want to have those relationships, but how to take out that transaction is really what I think we're trying to fix.
Could I just ask, because it feels to me like you've been saying that like something about it is that the food itself makes you feel like you're being given a gift, but don't you think that they're just using the food to buy that time, to have that time?
Oh,
with
absolutely.
You?
Yeah.
So don't you
exactly
think? So don't you think if you go and just drink water, it's kind of similar?
Well, so that's just it.
Even if you're not taking
transactional, and that's just it. You're taking that transaction out of it, and and for me, it's like about being bought. It's about there's like all of
so
these
it's
other
making
not only stigmas about it, but reality is about the more you spend time, and then now you're starting to maybe I really like Comcast. No, I mean who knows? And
right.
It's very hyper relational, and it is about how you create those relationships. With different interests, that are all trying to push their agenda with you, and get their,
For you, that transaction is material, not time.
But I mean, yeah, in this regard, absolutely. And when we talk about, campaigning and when we talk about, that relationship, all of that is absolutely reported and understood that you spent this time with these groups and they bought you this, or they gave you a free golf pass to go to X or go skiing on this, and that is just, crazy to me that it's like, you just, how do I forego the little tchotchkes and things that I just say I'm good. So, yeah. So, yeah.
Just regarding, kind of, along the same lines, you mentioned Comcast. We've heard that one of the obstacles to development or further development of the movie industry here in Santa Fe is the lack of access to broadband internet.
Yeah.
And actually, I'm on West Alameda and we don't have it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, we're stuck with one company. We can't even, so that's kind of a problem. What do you think? You can help. How you can help with that?
Yeah, that's New Mexico's infrastructure problem, and we're not alone in that regard. I think a bunch of cities are trying to figure out how to get their infrastructure up to snuff, and so a lot of that is dealing with sort of grandfathered in permits and contracts that have already existed between the cities and the counties and things like that. So how to create broader competition. But it's also not lucrative for many of these companies to put in all of that infrastructure, to fiber wire, all of the Poaque Valley. So a lot of times you'll see co-ops come through the ReadyNet, the Regional Economic Development Initiative, that's committed to like a middle mile project, saying we're going to fund all of the big, most expensive portion, and then get the local governments or the companies to come through, bid competitively, and hook everyone up on this fiber. So Santa Fe is quite tough in that regard because we have historic districts, we have contracts, it's very complicated. As far as why, you're like, the rail yard, I can see it from my house, or I can, can I get fiber? What's the deal here? And all of that navigational, piece is very complicated, and it has to do with, what can you dig, what can you put on an electric pole, who gets that, lien, who gets that lease agreement for the fiber on an electric pole, things like that. All of that has to be negotiated, decided, and have, buy-in from the city, so on and so forth. So it is complex, and believe me, this is how we get things done in the 21st century and provide an option for business. So as much as I can support that, but have to, we don't want to create monopolies. We don't want to disincentivize, essentially I mean, I see internet access as critical and necessary as, you know, electricity, running water, like we rely on it so heavily, and it needs to be democratized in the same way and accessible in the same way. So how we approach that is basically what I'll be looking at.
Leslie's going to be our last question. Just again, in the interest of time, then I'll wrap it up and hand it over to Scott. Leslie.
So almost not a question, but piggybacking on what Bird was saying, you know, and someone else mentioned Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the Green New Deal, the comprehensive approach to climate, not just, well, we should tinker on this thing and maybe have a bill about this, but a whole package, like the original New Deal. It's the whole package of things. It's probably too late for us to create that this session, I suppose, but I just want to put a plug in for that more comprehensive approach soon. So that's all.
Absolutely, and I think what New Mexico's version of that is going to be in this coming session
Great.
is the securitization bill between with PNM. How we deal with the Four Corners region and the shutdown of the coal plant and a renewable energy portfolio standard. How we're going to essentially move in that direction. It is going to be a very large piece of legislation that deals with how we work with PNM going forward. And if you don't know yet that PNM has a monopoly over our biggest cities, Santa Fe, Albuquerque, and Las Cruces, and then everything else in the state is pretty much run by Tri-State, a co-op sort of umbrella over everything else.
It's mainly dirty energy.
Yes. Tri-State for sure. They have a 3% cap on renewables. I was like, I'm sorry, what?
The ski basin is tied into that, and they can't get out for 10 years.
Yeah, so we've seen companies, I mean, Kit Carson and Taos bought out of that cooperative and is doing their own thing independently, and they're becoming a model for all of these other co-ops that are like, we're just done. And some not. I mean, so we'll see how that kind of, I'm actually meeting with Kit Carson next week to learn about some of that, and how they did it, and how to be able to understand some more of that process, because energy is, you know, for New Mexico is going to be so critical. And they're looking at how potentially one of New Mexico's bigger picture economic development opportunities is providing clean energy to all of our surrounding areas, not just the state, which requires about something like 38 terawatts. Is that how you, I don't know. It's like 38 terawatts the state needs to sustain itself, when we can produce like 4,600 terawatts of energy cleanly with wind and with solar. So it can be a great export for us. The transmission lines and things that we're looking at throughout the state, and to mostly Arizona, California, Utah, Nevada, Colorado. There's huge opportunities there. And so one of the pivot points with the securitization bill is it possible to do potential economic development with solar, since they have all of those transmission lines there, to transition that. So that's kind of New Mexico's new Green Deal that'll be really substantial, and how we position going forward with energy.